It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend. 4 friends, Matt, Chris, Alex, and myself, Jason, had decided to go camping in Blackwood Forest. We were all experienced outdoorsmen, and the forest was known for its dense trees and rich wildlife. It felt like the perfect escape from our busy lives. Little did we know this trip would turn into a nightmare. We arrived at our chosen campsite just before dusk, setting up our tents and gathering wood for a fire. As darkness enveloped the forest, we sat around the crackling flames, sharing stories and laughter. The woods were eerily silent, except for the occasional rustle of leaves. It felt like we were the only ones for miles, but that sense of isolation quickly turned sinister. As the night wore on, Chris suggested we explore deeper into the forest the next day. There were rumors of an old cabin hidden somewhere within, abandoned for decades. It seemed like a thrilling adventure, and we all agreed. The next morning, we set off after breakfast, armed with maps, compasses, and a sense of excitement. The forest grew denser as we ventured further, the trees towering above us like ancient sentinels. After hours of trekking, we stumbled upon a narrow, overgrown path that led us to the cabin. It was a dilapidated structure, weathered and decaying, half hidden by the encroaching foliage. The windows were boarded up, and the door hung on its hinges. A sense of unease settled over us, but curiosity drove us forward. We pried open the door and stepped inside, the air heavy with the scent of mold and rot. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that pierced through the cracks in the walls. The cabin had been abandoned hastily, judging by the scattered belongings and overturned furniture. "Check this place out," Matt said, running his fingers over a dusty shelf. "It's like a time capsule." We split up to explore different parts of the cabin. Matt and Alex headed upstairs, while Chris and I stayed on the ground floor. As we moved through the rooms, a chill seemed to seep into our bones. There was an unshakable feeling of being watched. Chris found an old journal on a desk in what appeared to be a study. The entries were cryptic, filled with ramblings about creatures in the forest and strange rituals. As he read aloud, the temperature in the room seemed to drop, and an oppressive silence fell. "Listen to this," Chris said, flipping through the pages. "They talk about summoning spirits and binding them to this place. It's like something out of a horror movie." I shivered, glancing around the room. "Let's not hang around too long. This place gives me the creeps." Suddenly, we heard a crash from upstairs, followed by a scream. Chris and I rushed up the narrow staircase, our hearts pounding. We found Matt standing in a room, pale and shaking, staring at a large, shattered mirror on the floor. Alex was nowhere to be seen. "He was right here," Matt stammered. "I saw him in the mirror. But then he just vanished." A sense of dread filled us. We called out for Alex, our voices echoing through the cabin, but there was no response. Chris, always the rational one, suggested we leave immediately and find help. But as we turned to go, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The cabin was plunged into darkness as an unnatural wind extinguished our lanterns. Panic set in as we fumbled to relight them. In the flickering glow, we saw something that chilled us to the core. Standing in the doorway was a creature, hunched and grotesque, with skin stretched tight over protruding bones. Its eyes were dark pits, and its mouth twisted into a ghastly grin. It emitted a guttural growl, and we backed away in terror. "What the hell is that?" Matt whispered, his voice trembling. Chris made a break for the door, but the creature moved with unnatural speed, grabbing him and dragging him into the shadows. His screams echoed through the cabin, then abruptly ceased. Matt and I bolted, racing back down the stairs, but the creature was relentless. We barricaded ourselves in what seemed to be a bedroom. The creature's growls and the sound of splintering wood filled the air as it tried to break through the door. Matt and I searched frantically for anything to defend ourselves. He found an old hunting rifle in a closet, while I grabbed a rusted machete. "Do you even know how to use that thing?" Matt asked, his hands shaking as he loaded the rifle. "Better than nothing," I replied, gripping the machete tightly. The door finally gave way, and the creature lunged at us. Matt fired the rifle, the shot echoing like thunder in the confined space. The creature staggered but did not fall. I swung the machete, striking its arm, but it felt like hitting solid rock. The creature's eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a cold dread seep into my soul. It let out a blood-curdling scream, and Matt was suddenly yanked off his feet and thrown across the room. He hit the wall with a sickening thud and lay still. I slashed at the creature again, this time aiming for its head. The machete glanced off its skull, and it turned its full attention to me. I could see the depthless void in its eyes, a void that threatened to swallow me whole. Desperate, I grabbed a kerosene lamp from a nearby table and smashed it at the creature's feet, igniting a pool of flames. The creature recoiled, shrieking in pain and rage. Taking advantage of the distraction, I darted out of the room and down the stairs, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear the creature's enraged roars as it tore through the burning room. The cabin was rapidly filling with smoke, and I knew I had to get out before the whole place went up in flames. I stumbled through the darkness, nearly blinded by the smoke, and finally found the front door. I burst outside, gulping in the fresh air, but my relief was short-lived. The forest was alive with movement, shadowy figures darting between the trees. The realization hit me the creature wasn't alone. I ran blindly through the woods, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. The sounds of pursuit were all around me, snarls, growls, and the eerie whispers of unseen entities. I tripped and fell countless times, each time scrambling back to my feet with a renewed sense of terror. I could hear Matt's screams in my mind, haunting me. The sight of Chris being dragged away replayed over and over. I had to survive. I had to tell the world what lurked in Blackwood Forest. Somehow, I made it back to the campsite. Breathless and shaking, I grabbed my phone and called for help. Authorities arrived hours later, but they found no trace of the cabin. The forest seemed to have swallowed it whole. The police didn't believe my story, chalking it up to hallucinations or a traumatic response to the disappearance of my friends. But I know what I saw. I know what happened in Blackwood Forest. The faces of my friends, twisted in fear, visit me in my nightmares. I am the only one who made it out alive. But sometimes I wonder if a part of me is still trapped in that cursed cabin, lost to the darkness forever. In the months that followed, I did my best to move on, but the events of that night never left me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the creatures were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting. I started researching the history of Blackwood Forest and the cabin, uncovering tales of disappearances and strange sightings dating back centuries. It became clear that the forest was a place of ancient power, a place where the veil between our world and something darker was thin. The cabin had been built by a group of occultists who believed they could harness this power. They had been wrong. One night, as I was sifting through old records and newspaper clippings, I received a call. The voice on the other end was barely a whisper, filled with static and distortion. But I recognized it. It was Alex. "Help me," he said, the words sending a chill down my spine. "It's not over." The line went dead, leaving me in a stunned silence. I knew what I had to do. Gathering my gear, I prepared to return to Blackwood Forest. This time I wasn't going to run. This time I was going to end it, once and for all. Armed with knowledge and a determination born of fear and guilt, I set out alone. As I ventured once more into the heart of the forest, the shadows seemed to close in around me. The air grew colder, and the whispers of the trees grew louder. I reached the place where the cabin had stood, now nothing more than an empty clearing. But I could feel the presence of the creatures, lurking just beyond the edge of the light. I began the rituals I had learned from the journal, hoping to summon and bind the entities within the circle of protection I had created. Hours passed, and the night deepened. The forest grew silent, the air thick with anticipation. And then they came. One by one, the creatures emerged from the shadows, their eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. At their center was the creature that had haunted my nightmares, its gaze fixed upon me. I chanted the binding words, the symbols etched into the ground glowing with an ethereal light. The creatures recoiled, but the central figure stepped forward, breaking the circle with a single swipe of its claw. The light extinguished, plunging me into darkness. The creatures closed in, their eyes gleaming with hunger. My heart pounded, and every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. I was surrounded. Desperation surged through me as I tried to recall anything from the journal that could help. My mind raced, but fear clouded my thoughts. The creature that had broken the circle stepped forward, its eyes locked onto mine. There was something almost human in its gaze, a twisted reflection of the terror I felt. "Why?" I whispered, barely able to find my voice. "Why are you doing this?" The creature's mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. "You trespassed," it hissed. "This is our domain. You will join us." I backed away, my hands trembling. The creatures advanced slowly, savoring my fear. Just as they were about to close in, a flash of memory struck me. The journal had mentioned a final, desperate ritual that could banish the creatures, but at a terrible cost. With no other options, I began the incantation, my voice shaky but growing stronger. The creatures paused, their eyes narrowing. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to writhe in agony. I continued the chant, drawing upon every ounce of strength and willpower I had left. A brilliant light erupted from the symbols etched on the ground, searing the darkness. The creatures shrieked in pain and fury, their forms dissolving into shadowy wisps. The central figure lunged at me, but I held my ground, forcing the words out through gritted teeth. The light intensified, blinding in its brilliance. The creature let out a final, bone-chilling scream before it too was consumed by the light. Then, with a thunderous clap, the light vanished, and I was left standing in the silent, empty clearing. The forest was still, the oppressive presence lifted. I collapsed to my knees, exhausted and shaking. The ritual had worked, but I had no idea what the cost would be. The journal had been vague, only hinting at a price to be paid. As dawn broke, I made my way out of the forest, every step a struggle. The memories of my friends' faces haunted me, their screams echoing in my mind. I emerged from the trees, battered and bruised but alive. The authorities were skeptical of my story, attributing it to trauma and hallucinations. But I knew the truth. The forest had claimed my friends, and I had barely escaped with my life. The journal and its secrets were gone, consumed by the same light that had banished the creatures. I tried to return to a normal life, but the events of that night never left me. The shadows seemed darker, the silence more oppressive. I could feel the forest's eyes upon me, a constant reminder of what I had faced. Though the nightmares still come, I face them with the knowledge that I have fought the darkness and escaped. The forest no longer holds its power over me. I am free, but I will never forget. The cabin in the woods, the creatures, and the price me and my friends paid will always be a part of me, a reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown.